Ethan sat back in the wicker chair on the porch, letting the soft morning breeze brush against his face as he gazed at the clear, open sky. It was one of those rare moments when everything seemed peaceful, and he soaked in the quiet beside Lindsey, who was flipping through a magazine. On the small table between them sat 2 cups of coffee and a plate of toast that had barely been touched. Life felt good, or at least, that's how it seemed. Then, without taking her eyes off the pages, Lindsey broke the calm with an unexpected remark, "I've been thinking about something." Her tone was casual, but Ethan caught a slight hesitation in her voice. He turned his head toward her, curious but completely unaware of what was about to unfold. "What if we invited my friend Julia to date with us?" she continued, her words carrying a nervous smile, like she was testing how they might sound once spoken. She looked to him, waiting for a reaction she wasn't entirely sure about. Ethan froze, his cup suspended in mid-air for a second, as if time itself had paused. Date with us? Did he hear that right? The coffee, now starting to cool, seemed like the last thing on his mind. He knew Lindsey and Julia were close, practically inseparable, but the idea of taking that bond to a level far beyond friendship was something he had never even considered. Sensing his silence, Lindsey pressed on, her voice now more steady but still laced with caution. "I know it sounds strange, but I feel something different for her. Something that goes deeper than just being friends." Ethan remained quiet, his mind scrambling to make sense of her words. It was as if someone had flipped a switch, plunging him into a new reality where everything he thought he knew about their relationship was being redefined right before his eyes. Lindsey searched his face, looking for any sign of what he might be feeling, but Ethan could barely keep up with the whirlwind of thoughts racing through his head. Just moments ago, everything had seemed so normal, like any other sunny morning. But now, what had begun as a peaceful breakfast had spiraled into something he never saw coming. Sure, he knew Julia. She was smart, fun, and had a vibrant personality, but never, not in a million years, had he thought Lindsey might want something more with her. As Lindsey explained her feelings, she did so with a sense of calm, as though now was the perfect time to open up. She spoke without hesitation, but there was an understanding in her voice, an awareness that she was guiding Ethan into unfamiliar, uncharted waters. "I know it's a lot to take in," she added, her smile still nervous, "but I think there's a way we could explore this without it hurting what we have." Ethan still couldn't wrap his head around it. How could this not affect what they had? He loved her and had always believed that was enough. But now, with this sudden proposal, he found himself questioning whether he truly understood what Lindsey needed to be happy. A thoughtful silence hung between them for a few minutes, but oddly, it wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that came with deep reflection, with both of them trying to make sense of what had just been said. Ethan knew he needed to tread carefully before responding. And Lindsey knew him well enough to give him space, which only reinforced how much their relationship had always been built on honesty. Yet, for the first time, he wasn't sure if he was ready to face that honesty. He stared out at the horizon, his thoughts a tangled mess. Lindsey sat quietly, letting him take it all in. The coffee, by now completely cold, remained untouched. Ethan took a deep breath, realizing that this conversation was just the start of something that would undoubtedly change their lives forever, no matter what direction it went. In the days that followed that unexpected morning, Ethan couldn't shake the thoughts swirling in his head. The image of Lindsey's face, glowing in the sunlight as she made her proposal, replayed in his mind over and over, like a scene from a movie on repeat. At first, he tried to brush the idea aside, burying himself in his usual routines, but the weight of that conversation hung over him. His thoughts were anything but settled. Every time he saw Lindsey, whether she was chuckling at something on TV or watering the plants in the backyard, Ethan sensed an unspoken shift between them. What was once solid and predictable now seemed marked by uncertainty. He had always believed he understood his wife completely. They shared their hopes, their fears, and a closeness that few others experienced. But now, He began to wonder if he truly knew everything about what Lindsey needed to feel fulfilled. One night, sitting alone on the couch while Lindsey slept, Ethan allowed his mind to roam freely. Was he being selfish for feeling unsettled by the idea? There was no question he loved her, but could that love withstand something so unexpected, something so far outside the boundaries of what he thought a relationship should be? And perhaps the biggest question, how far was he willing to go to make sure she was happy? The notion of bringing Julia into their lives in such an intimate way troubled him deeply. It wasn't that he had anything against Julia, in fact, she was a great person. But there was a line between friendship and intimacy, a line Ethan had never considered crossing. And the fact that Lindsey was seemingly ready to cross it left him wondering if he was truly prepared for what that meant. Each time he thought he had an answer, more questions arose. Was this something Lindsey genuinely wanted, or was it just an idea she was curious about exploring? And where did that leave him? The idea of sharing his relationship with someone else was something that had never crossed his mind. It wasn't in his plans, not even remotely. Ethan understood that whatever answer he gave Lindsey would be a turning point. He needed to be honest with her, but before he could do that, he had to be honest with himself. The pressure mounted with each passing day, like time was slipping through his fingers faster than he could make sense of it all. He knew he couldn't avoid the conversation forever, but he also knew he needed clarity before he could talk to her again. The nights lying beside Lindsey, listening to the rhythm of her breathing, became a time for deep reflection. He found himself questioning how the woman he loved so deeply, the woman he thought he knew better than anyone, had come to this conclusion. Was there some kind of dissatisfaction he had missed? Something he should have done differently? Ethan began to wonder if he had somehow fallen short as a husband without even realizing it. The more he thought, the more complex the situation became. Yet, one thing was certain, he had to face this with the same honesty Lindsey had shown him. It was the only way to protect what was special between them. Ethan knew that relying solely on his own thoughts wouldn't be enough. He needed someone else's perspective, and there was no one he trusted more than his best friend, Kyle, who had always been there for him through life's twists and turns. So, on a Friday afternoon, he called Kyle and suggested they grab a beer together. It was the kind of casual hangout they often had, but Ethan knew the conversation ahead would be anything but ordinary. When they got to their usual spot, Ethan was quieter than usual. Kyle noticed but didn't press him, knowing Ethan would open up when he was ready. They ordered 2 beers and found a table tucked in the corner, far from any distractions. The bar, with its dim lighting and soft music playing in the background, felt like the perfect place to have a serious talk. "Man, I've got something I need to tell you," Ethan started, his voice laced with hesitation. Kyle raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Kyle was used to Ethan being thoughtful, but something in his tone felt different this time. Ethan took a deep breath, pausing to sip his beer before continuing. "Lindsey made me a proposal, one I never thought I'd hear," he said. Kyle stayed quiet, letting Ethan continue at his own pace. He knew that any interruption might make his friend pull back. "Lindsey suggested we invite Julia to be, well, more than just a friend," Ethan explained, now staring into his beer, unsure how to put it more clearly. Kyle's face didn't immediately show his reaction, but it was clear he was caught off guard. Julia? He thought. Lindsey's friend who was always around. Was that really the person Lindsey wanted to bring into their relationship? Wow, Kyle finally responded, trying to wrap his head around what Ethan had just shared. That's a lot. How are you feeling about it? That was the question Ethan had been asking himself non-stop, and he still didn't have an answer. Man, I love Lindsey. And I trust her, but this really threw me for a loop. I never thought our relationship would head in this direction. I don't know how to handle it. I'm not even sure if I should try, he admitted. Kyle took a slow sip of his beer, weighing Ethan's words. After a thoughtful pause, he spoke with a seriousness that he didn't usually bring to their conversations. Ethan, the first thing you need to figure out is what you want. Not what Lindsey wants or what Julia might want, just what you feel. Is this something you can get on board with? Because, at the end of the day, if you're not comfortable, this could mess everything up. Ethan absorbed his friend's advice. It was exactly what he needed to hear, even if it was a hard truth. Lindsey had been open with him, and now he knew he had to be just as open, first with himself and then with her. I'm not sure if I can, Kyle. This isn't something I ever thought I'd be dealing with. I never imagined I'd have to make a decision like this, Ethan confessed, running his hand through his hair, a nervous habit he had when he was feeling overwhelmed. Kyle nodded, fully understanding the weight of Ethan's dilemma. It's a simple question, but the answer isn't. If this is going to affect what you and Lindsey have, you need to be clear about that with her. She loves you, man. She'll get it. The most important thing is that you two stay honest with each other. If something doesn't sit right with you, it's better to say it now than let it grow into something bigger than you can handle. Kyle's words echoed in Ethan's mind. He knew his friend was right. It was time to stop thinking about what might work for Lindsey or Julia and start focusing on his own feelings. He needed clarity, and he realized he couldn't avoid the conversation with Lindsey much longer. A few days after the talk with Kyle, Ethan felt more certain about what he had to do. He couldn't put off the discussion with Lindsey any longer. The weight of her unexpected proposal had already become a lingering presence between them, and every time he looked at her, he didn't just see the woman he loved, he also saw the unresolved question hanging in the air. He had to face it, once and for all. It was a quiet evening, and Lindsey was curled up on the couch, lost in her book. Ethan sat down beside her, his heart beating faster than usual. He knew this wasn't going to be an easy conversation, but it was necessary. He took a deep breath, and before he could even speak, Lindsey sensed the change in his demeanor. She closed her book and gave him a curious look. "We need to talk," Ethan began, his voice calm, even though a storm of emotions brewed inside him. Lindsey tilted her head slightly, clearly waiting to hear what he had to say next. Ethan could feel the weight of his words before they even left his mouth, but he knew he had to be direct. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about what you brought up, about Julia," Ethan began, his voice steady but with a hint of hesitation. Lindsey's expression grew more serious, and Ethan could see the tension flicker in her eyes, as if she already sensed his answer wasn't going to be what she hoped for. "Lindsey, I love you. And everything we've built together means the world to me. But the idea of bringing someone else into our relationship. I just can't see myself doing that." Ethan paused, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. He knew he needed to tread carefully, but above all, he had to be truthful. "I get that you feel a deep connection with Julia, and I respect that. But I have to be honest, with you and with myself. This just isn't something I can accept." Lindsey listened quietly, her gaze fixed on Ethan's face, as if trying to catch every word, every emotion he was conveying. She bit her lip, a nervous habit Ethan had long since come to recognize, but she didn't say a word. Her silence felt heavy but also understanding, as though she was giving him all the space he needed to explain. That quiet openness between them only reaffirmed how much they valued one another. "I'm not saying this to push you away, or to make you feel like you did something wrong," Ethan continued, his tone softening. "Actually, the fact that we're having this conversation shows how strong we are together. But deep down, I know that bringing someone else into the mix would complicate things in ways we might not be ready for. At least, I'm not." For the first time, Lindsey took a deep breath, exhaling slowly, as if she were processing everything he had said. "Ethan, I knew this would be a tough conversation. I didn't want to make you uncomfortable, and that's why I gave you time to think. But the most important thing, the thing I value the most, is that you were honest with me." She gave a small smile, one of understanding rather than disappointment. "I know it's not typical, and maybe I let my feelings for Julia carry me away. But you're right. What we have is special, and I'd never do anything to jeopardize that. Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him, a feeling he hadn't realized he so desperately needed. Lindsey moved closer, taking his hand and squeezing it gently. What matters most is that we're solid, together. Julia will always be a friend, but I'd never let that friendship become a problem between us. Her words brought him an unexpected sense of calm. Ethan realized then that their love and mutual respect were stronger than any challenge or uncertainty that might arise. They embraced, and in that moment, Ethan knew they had passed a quiet test, one that could have shaken the foundation of their relationship but had, in the end, only fortified it. Their hug lingered, neither of them in a hurry to let go. The night seemed more peaceful now, and the weight that had burdened Ethan for days finally lifted. Everything was clear again, and the certainty that they had built something real and lasting was renewed. A few days passed after that heart-to-heart with Lindsey, and while Ethan believed everything had been settled, a lingering sense of unease still gnawed at him. It was as if, despite the calm on the surface, something unresolved hung in the air, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. That Friday, after a long week at work, Ethan decided to unwind with some beers, inviting Kyle to join him. He needed a break, a chance to shake off the thoughts that had been buzzing around in his head ever since Lindsey's proposal. After a few rounds, he felt lighter, though the haze of the alcohol still clung to him as he drove home. As soon as he parked in the garage, he noticed Julia's car. Oh, right, it's Friday, he thought. Julia always comes by on Fridays. But something about the situation felt off. Stepping into the house, Ethan was struck by the unusual silence. No voices, no laughter, just an empty, quiet living room. An eerie silence filled the house. Ethan called out to Lindsey, but no answer came. His heartbeat quickened, a sense of unease growing within him. He headed upstairs, and as he neared the bedroom, he noticed the bathroom door was slightly ajar. That's when he heard the sound of soft laughter mixed with the faint clinking of glasses. With his pulse racing, Ethan slowly pushed the door open and was immediately confronted with a sight that left him frozen in place. Lindsey and Julia were in the bathtub together, completely naked, sipping champagne and laughing about something he couldn't quite catch. They both noticed him, and with a relaxed smile, Lindsey said, "Come on, Ethan. Join us in the bath." Ethan hesitated, his mind swirling with confusion. For a split second, he almost considered stepping in, almost accepted the invitation. But something deep inside stopped him. Instead, he turned away, leaving the room and heading straight to the couch in the living room, where he tried to distract himself with the TV. But the image of the two women lingered, relentlessly playing in his mind. He kept questioning himself. Why was he so bothered? It was just Lindsey and Julia, like so many other times. They had always been close. But after their conversation, everything felt different. Every shared laugh, every little gesture now seemed to carry a hidden meaning, something he couldn't brush off. After a while, Ethan decided he wasn't going back upstairs. He didn't want to make the situation more complicated. He stayed on the couch, lost in thought, until he heard the front door open and close. Julia had left. When Lindsey finally came downstairs, Ethan could no longer keep his emotions in check. "So, what was that all about?" he asked, his tone sharper than he intended. Lindsey looked at him, taken aback by his tone. "What do you mean?" "Nothing. We were just drinking champagne in the bath. What's the big deal?" she replied, her voice defensive. Ethan sighed, trying to keep his growing frustration in check. "If you hadn't made that proposal, maybe I wouldn't think twice about it. But now, knowing you want to date your friend, it just feels different." Lindsey crossed her arms, her expression shifting from surprise to mild irritation. "You have to trust me, Ethan. Nothing happened, and nothing's going to happen. We've always done this. And just because I mentioned my feelings, now you're going to start doubting me? I thought we were past that." Ethan stood there quietly, struggling to find the right words. Does Julia know about how you feel? Of course not, Lindsey answered quickly. I told you that in confidence, Ethan. Only you. Ethan searched her face, trying to figure out if anything had truly changed or if his own insecurity was gnawing at him. But the doubt lingered, stronger than he expected. After a pause, he stood up from the couch, running his hands over his face as if trying to wipe away the confusion clouding his thoughts. I believe you, Lindsey, but everything seems to be moving in a direction I'm not sure I can follow. What do you really want from all this? Is it just Julia, or is there something more you're not telling me? The question hung heavy in the air, and for a moment, it seemed like Lindsey was about to respond. She hesitated, biting her lip, and then there was silence again. Ethan let out a slow breath, preparing himself to end the conversation. But before he could say another word, Lindsey spoke, her voice soft, almost a whisper. Ethan, there's something you need to know. Her tone had changed, carrying a tension Ethan hadn't heard before. Ethan turned to face her, his heart pounding in his chest. What are you trying to tell me? He asked, his voice tight with anticipation. Lindsey stepped closer, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. Finally, she said, Julia and we had something in the past. This was before you and I met. I never brought it up because I didn't think it mattered, but now, with everything I've told you, I guess maybe it does. Ethan felt as if the ground beneath him had disappeared. The world around him seemed to slow as Lindsey's confession echoed in his mind. She and Julia. It had already happened. What once seemed like a strange suggestion now had a hidden history, something he never saw coming. Ethan struggled to make sense of it, of what it meant for their relationship, of what he thought he knew about Lindsey. So, you were already involved with her, and now you want to go back to that? He asked, his voice wavering between disbelief and uncertainty. Lindsey quickly shook her head. No, Ethan. It's not like that. I love you. What we had back then, it was something different. I only felt like I should tell you now because, yes, I still feel something for her. But what I feel for you, it's different. It's bigger. I don't want to lose that. Ethan, still reeling, took a step back. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but not in the way he had expected. Everything felt clearer now, but also far more complicated. He had always valued Lindsey's honesty, but this truth, it was overwhelming. He looked at her, his emotions swirling. I need some time to process this, he said softly, barely above a whisper. Without waiting for a response, Ethan grabbed his car keys and left, the silence of the house pressing down as he walked out the door. As he drove along the empty road, the only thought running through Ethan's mind was, how did it all come to this? The shock of Lindsey's revelation still clung to him, but as the wind blew through the open window and the miles stretched ahead, something inside him began to settle. He loved Lindsey. They had built a life grounded in trust and honesty. And now, he realized, Lindsey had been completely honest with him, even when she could have kept this part of her past hidden. That in itself meant something. Ethan pulled over into a quiet spot, turned off the engine, and sat there in silence for a few minutes, reflecting. As he sifted through his thoughts, he understood that his fear wasn't really about Lindsey's past with Julia. It was about what it meant for their future. But as he recalled the sincere look in Lindsey's eyes and the way she had always put him first, he knew he could trust her. He realized that Lindsey's proposal wasn't about jeopardizing what they had, it was about sharing something in a way they could both navigate together. It didn't take away from the love she had for him. If anything, it showed how secure she felt in their relationship, enough to be completely open about her desires and trust that he would stand by her side, making decisions together. With a deep breath, Ethan started the car and headed home. When he walked through the door, Lindsey was sitting on the couch, her face tense with worry. The moment she saw him, relief flooded her eyes, though there was still uncertainty lingering there. Ethan walked over, sat beside her, and took her hands in his. I've thought a lot about everything, he began, his voice calm but steady. "And I've come to realize that what really matters is what we've built together. I trust you, Lindsey. I've always trusted you. And if this is something you want to explore, we'll talk it through and figure it out as we go. But what I need you to know is that I love you, and I'm not going to let anything destroy what we have." Lindsey, surprised and clearly emotional, squeezed his hands tightly. "Ethan, I never wanted to hurt you, ever. What we have is everything to me." Ethan smiled softly, feeling the weight of the past few days finally lift from his shoulders. "I know. We're going to be okay, Lindsey. We'll handle this together, just like we always have." They embraced, a hug that seemed to dissolve all the lingering doubts and fears. In that moment, Ethan knew that, despite the challenges ahead, their love and trust were strong enough to handle whatever came their way. And so, they were more united than ever, ready to face the future with honesty and closeness.